Welcome everyone to today's webinar on rollover best practices. This is part of our Bright Ideas for K-12 series. So I'll note that sort of the examples and the language that I use today reflect K-12. But if you're from another segment and you're looking to learn more about rollover best practices, you are welcome to stick around and see if it's something that's helpful for you. Let's get started with today's agenda. So we'll start with some quick introductions, and then from there we'll define rollover and associated activities. We'll talk about why rollover is important. We'll go into more detail on what those activities are, and we'll review some rollover resources that we have for you, including a best practices course in the Brightspace community, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, I see some familiar names attending, but there's also some new faces. So my name's Melissa, and I'm a Senior Customer Success Manager here at D2L. As you can see on the slide, I'm joined by several of my colleagues today who will be assisting with, facilitating the webinar and assisting with the Q&A. So thank you, Whitney, Sophie, and Sebastian for your support today. Before we get too far, I want to take a moment to define some terms. So you might have heard of D2L or Brightspace before, but we find that people often use these terms interchangeably, and we just want to provide some clarity and ensure that we're using some common language. So D2L is the name of the company that we work for, and Brightspace is the name of the product that we make. It's a learning management system, often referred to as an LMS, and depending on where you work, your district or your province or state may call Brightspace something like eClass, iLearn NYC, or the VLE. But for today's purposes, we'll be using Brightspace as a way of referring to the LMS. I also want to note that we have a Brightspace community, which is a hub of resources that you can access to connect with other Brightspace users and seek out additional information. It has helpful how-to documentation, video resources, and it is free to join. We recommend using your school district or school board email. So for today's session, let's just chat about what we are planning to cover. So learning objectives for today are to define rollover and understand why it's an important process, to identify the Brightspace tools that support each stage of the rollover process, and to apply best practices for planning and executing rollover workflows. So let's talk about rollover. Rollover is a term that references the creation of new courses, usually at the start of a new academic year, a training session, or when the bulk of new courses begin. For K-12 districts, this typically happens in the late summer or early fall, and there'll be a big rollover at the start of the school year. It's possible that for high school courses, for example, there may be semester-long courses, and there's a rollover that happens partway in between, or that you may be part of a program with no defined timeline that has rolling enrollment. So there's lots of different ways this can look. Again, we're going to try to capture sort of overarching best practices and to provide you with some examples and tools, and so that you can take that information back and apply it to your particular context. So the steps for a rollover that we'll go over today are creating courses and semesters, managing dates, enrolling users, creating and copying content. And one thing I want to note just off the top, and I'll repeat this throughout, but if your district or school board has configured IPSIS, which is an integration with your student information system, then steps 1 to 3 are typically managed by that integration with your SIS. So again, kind of having an understanding of how your board is approaching this will be important to apply these practices appropriately. So why is rollover important? Rolling over courses at the start of a new year term helps us to maintain data cleanliness and user progress. So it keeps the class list and user progress, including course completion, organized within the academic calendar year, and ensures that teachers and students only see course information that's relevant to them. It ensures that learners have access to their new courses and that they are aligned to the start and end dates for a particular year or term set by your district to better monitor completion data, and it gives us a finite point to pull data from when tracking completion or finishing with those final grades. And finally, the rollover also gives us an opportunity to refresh our course content. So if we're using the same course year over year, and we never get the chance to update learning materials because there are always students working within that environment, that can be really challenging as an educator. So the rollover process is a perfect time to reflect back on course feedback surveys, or other data to determine what needs to be adjusted before the next year. If you are a customer that's using D2L Lumi Pro, I just want to note that this is a great time to review and take a look at any insights from the study support tool to update your quiz content. And if you're using Lumi Remix, that can be an incredibly helpful tool to adjust content for a different tone or audience as you move from one year to the next while maintaining your instructional goals and your learning outcomes. You can also use Lumi Remix to add relevant and timely examples of concepts covered in your course. Let's take a look at step one. So we've reviewed what the rollover activities are and why they're important. And now we're going to talk about the tools that can support you with each of these activities. One of the things I'll note off the top is that all of these activities can be completed using our APIs. I'm not going to go into detail on that today, but if your district has developed or purchased a custom tool that completes some or all of these actions via API, that will be something for you to take into account as you look at these workflows. When we look at creating courses and semesters, these tools are typically, these tools and actions are typically associated with administrator roles in Brightspace. So if you're not able to complete these actions, it's likely because you don't have the appropriate permissions. I'm hoping that that's intentional. If not, I would connect with your administrator on that. But to create a structure, you can use an org unit editor to create semesters manually. This can also be managed via Ipsys if you have that student information system integration in place. To create the courses, you have a few different options. So you can, they can be created via the courses tool. That's a screenshot of what's on the right-hand side here. So that's the courses tool, which is best used for individual courses. You can use bulk tools. So bulk course create allows you to create a large number of courses at once. Or again, you can use your SIS integration where that sync with your student information system will create the courses for you. The next action is to manage dates. So this allows you to set start and end dates or availability dates for courses. The courses tool allows you to set and create those dates when you create the course. So if you're just creating one, you can set it at the time of creation. It does also allow for you to set dates in bulk. So if you scroll to if you're on your courses tool and you scroll to the bottom and you click you click load more, you can load more courses than what's initially on your screen there. And you can select up to 250 courses at a time to bulk manage those dates. If this falls to an individual instructor to set, this can be done under the course admin tool in Brightspace if you navigate to activate course and course info. So if that's an instructor specific task, then you can complete that there. And if you're using Ipsys, these dates can be set via your SIS integration. A couple things that are important to note with this is you should only use the courses tool or the course admin workflow to perform updates in a system where course dates and statuses are not managed through an external system such as the student information system. If your courses are managed by the SIS integration, updates to the status and the start and end dates using the courses tool can cause the values to revert. And we do not recommend that you use the courses tool to perform bulk updates in environments where instructors are permitted to set course dates and statuses individually. If you use courses to complete bulk actions, it will overwrite the individual instructor settings. So again, as with every step here, but I just want to reiterate that it's important to have a defined process for your organization and then to communicate that with your users to make sure that you're not conflicting or overwriting information that one system is setting. The next piece is to enroll users. So the user management tool allows you to enroll a single user into a course or into several courses. And the video on this slide is showing an example of how to manage a user's enrollment in the user management tool. Depending on your district setup, the instructor may be responsible for enrolling their learners in a course. So if that's the case, you may have the permissions to, if you go to the class list, you can add existing users or you can create and enroll new users. Again, that's important to know whether or not that adding existing users or creating those users is happening by administrator or if that's an individual instructor task. You can also use bulk tools. So bulk user management allows you to do the same actions in bulk. In the users tool, if you navigate to the bulk user management tab, you can view instructions and download CSV templates that will support you in that workflow. And then finally, and similar to the previous slides, if you have a SIS integration, those actions can be performed through the SIS integration. The next piece here is looking at populating a course by creating or copying content. So this task is typically one that's completed by an instructor or a facilitator to either move content from a previous year forward or to copy content from a master or parent course to your current course offering. You can use bulk tools if you're moving all content from a master course or a parent course into a group of courses. There's a few different use cases where people might be using bulk course copy to complete that process. And if you're doing it on an individual basis, which is what the video on this slide is showing, then you can use the import, export, copy components tool from the admin wheel or from directly within the course under the course admin section. This is typically what we see instructors use to copy their content from a previous year over to the next year. The other thing I'll note about timing process for this is the order of these steps might vary based on your organization and the workflow that you have in place. So if I go back one slide and I look at enrolling users, your institution or your district's process might look like enrolling teachers first and then having them create and copy content, and then maybe the learners get enrolled later, or maybe all of those enrollments happen at once, and then the teacher is responsible for making that course active, changing that status at the start of the school year. So just want you to keep in mind that these are sort of some general best practices or workflows to think about, and the exact sequencing of these will depend on your district and how you're determining to set this up. So as I mentioned, with lots of different rollover workflows, different approaches to enrollments, different types of courses, there's not one particular time frame or order that makes sense for every single district. I do want to show you an example of sequencing though, and then you can determine the timeline and the order that best aligns with your district. So we recommend that you start by communicating your rollover plan with your team. Communication should really clearly outline what's going to happen, by when, and by whom, so that everyone at the district knows what's expected of them at different times. What tasks will be completed for your teachers versus what tasks do they need to complete? Do they need to have all of their course content in the courses 1 week before a course goes live? These are expectations that should be shared with the educators early to allow them ample time to prepare. The next step, as we reviewed, is creating semesters if that's something that you're using within your district. From there, you can create your courses. And whether those course offerings are created through Ipsys or bulk tools or individually, be sure to give yourself time to do any merging or create sections or any other steps that are required before making that course live. If your educators are responsible for creating content, you want to ensure that they're enrolled in those courses shortly after the courses are created, and so they can begin creating or copying content from previous years into master courses. Again, depending on who's responsible, you want to make sure that you're managing those dates to set the start and end dates for the semester or for the term or the school year, depending on how you've defined that. Then, as I noted, you'll want to make sure that you're looking at enrolling users, and this may be done in 2 steps. Maybe it's done all at once, but you'll look at enrolling users and ensuring that everyone has access to those course offerings. And then finally, as I mentioned, making sure that you have created and copied course learning materials so that you're ready to go. This is a suggested workflow, but again, something for you to consider and take in for your own district purposes to determine the best workflow there. The last thing that I want to share before showing you the course in the D2L Academy is just to review some ideas and suggestions around content best practices. You may be doing some of these already, but we just like to call them out as reminders for folks. So for master or parent courses, ensure that you've created a master version of the course offering that instructors can copy from each time the course is reoffered. The idea behind a master course is typically to create a best version of the course offering, so that people can go and draw from those materials every time the course is reoffered. Usually in a master or parent course, there are no learners enrolled, but educators might have access where they can go in and review those materials and then make decisions about the pieces that they want to copy into their existing courses. The next suggestion is to use the quiz question library. So if you're not familiar, you're able to pull questions from different educators and create one large pool of questions to give variations within student assessments. So as you add questions to the question library from year to year, you increase the variety of questions that are ready to be used for formative or summative assessments. This can save you time from creating a brand new assessments every single year. Release conditions are another great tool within Brightspace to allow content to be shared with a learner as they progress through the course. So if you have a course with a start date, but you don't want everyone to view all the content at once, those release conditions can help you pace learners as they go through the course, where new content is released to them as they complete different requirements that you've set as an educator. They're also great for personalized learning paths. So you can automatically release accelerated or remedial content to students based on how they've done on an assessment or whether their level of achievement for a particular learning outcome. And lastly, as part of that refresh process, it's important to review different types of feedback from the previous year. So I touched on that earlier, but whether it be from content, quizzes, rubrics, grade statistics, or student feedback surveys, we encourage you to take time to note which areas students excelled in and which areas they might have struggled, and to review that feedback to consider any improvements or adjustments to your course content for the next year. So we've covered a lot of information, and I want to show you where you can find some resources in the Brightspace community if you want to refer back or learn a little bit more on your own time. I'm just going to open my web browser here. So I'm in the Brightspace community, and if I want to find some rollover materials, I can type rollover into the search. Here we go. And I can see there's a rollover best practices and strategies page here. So I'm going to click on this. This is a page that gives you an introduction to the resource. So it will tell you what the course is about, why it's valuable. There'll be some information to dive into the workflows, and then you can access the course from here. You can also access it from D2L Academy, which you can find under the resources tab on the top level navigation. Now just going to pop over into the course. So this is what the course looks like in the D2L Academy. You can see here there's some introductory concepts. It defines rollover. It reviews the tools, how to manage user enrollments, manage course content. And it also goes into more detail on archiving past courses and data purge, which we didn't go into detail today. But if that's something you're interested to learn more about, you can click in here and you can view the content. We'll give you some information about what to expect and then how to use the particular tools. And most of the pages have videos embedded to help explain some of these concepts to you. You'll also see there are knowledge checks embedded to help make sure that you have absorbed the information throughout the course. Okay, I'm going to back out of this and go back to my PowerPoint slides here. So I know we've covered a lot, but just to recap our learning objectives, so we defined rollover and we talked about why it's an important process. We identified the Brightspace tools that support each stage of the rollover process, and we reviewed best practices for planning and executing rollover workflows.